People often say that a funeral is where a family gathers to heal. They tell you that shared grief brings out the best in our bloodlines. They forget to mention the other side of that coin. Sometimes, the heavy scent of funeral lilies is the perfect signal for the vultures to start circling. Sometimes, the people who share your DNA are just waiting for the dirt to settle on the grave before they begin dismantling your legacy. I did not realize that until exactly 3 days ago. The Seattle rain was beating relentlessly against the large bay windows of my kitchen. The house was painfully quiet. It felt incredibly empty. My Clara was gone. 40 years of marriage, built on unyielding loyalty, cut short by a brutal illness. The scent of funeral flowers still hung thick in the cold air. I am 60 years old. I stood alone at the granite kitchen island. I was letting the warm water run over my hands as I washed a simple glass. It was a mindless task. I just needed something to keep my hands moving so my mind wouldn't wander back to the empty chair in our living room. Clara had picked out this granite. She loved this house. That was when I heard it. The sharp, rapid click of expensive heels echoing against the hardwood floor. I turned off the faucet. I dried my hands. My daughter-in-law, Evelyn, strutted into the kitchen. She was 44 years old. There was not a single tear in her eyes. There was absolutely no trace of sorrow on her perfectly powdered face. She was dressed in a sharp, black designer suit. She looked like a corporate predator walking into a hostile boardroom, not a woman mourning the passing of her mother-in-law. She did not offer a word of comfort. She did not ask how I was holding up. She simply walked up to the counter and dropped a thick manila folder onto the granite. The smack echoed loudly in the quiet room. I looked down. The bold black letters on the front page read, "Emergency handover and succession agreement." "What is this, Evelyn?" I asked. I kept my voice perfectly level. She let out a theatrical sigh. She looked at me like I was a stubborn child. "It is for your own good, Harrison," she said smoothly. "You are 60. You just lost Clara. You're deeply grieving. You are in no condition to run Vanguard Horizon right now. You need to sign this agreement today. We're going to transfer the executive operational powers to Connor." My grandson, Connor, was 20 years old. He was a pampered, entitled boy who spent his days crashing expensive sports cars and posting pictures of champagne bottles online. He had never looked a logistics balance sheet in his life. I stared at the document. A cold, hard knot formed in my stomach. Vanguard Horizon was not just a shipping company. It was a $40 million empire. Clara and I built it from a single rusting cargo boat on the Seattle docks. We didn't have wealthy investors. We had grit, sleepless nights, and a shared blueprint for the future. And now, just 3 days after I buried my wife, Evelyn wanted me to hand the keys to a reckless teenager so she could pull the strings from the shadows. Right on cue, my son Preston walked into the kitchen. He was 44, but standing next to his overbearing wife, he looked remarkably weak, a coward waiting for instructions. He placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. He put on a highly rehearsed mask of deep concern. "Dad, please just listen to her," Preston said softly. "Your blood pressure was so high at the hospital. We are terrified of losing you too. Just sign the papers. Let Connor hold the title in the family trust. Evelyn and I will handle the heavy lifting. You can finally rest." It sounded so incredibly caring. It was a perfectly constructed, plausible lie. But I knew my son. I spent millions on his elite education. Yet, he became a man who could not make a single major decision without his wife's permission. I did not yell. I did not throw them out of my house. I stayed quiet. In the ruthless world of corporate shipping, the one who loses their temper loses the entire negotiation. "I will think about it," I said quietly. I stepped back from the counter. "I need time to read the clauses." Preston nodded eagerly. He was relieved I didn't refuse. They turned around and walked out of the kitchen. I stood frozen. I slowly turned my head toward the large bay window. The glass was dark against the stormy Seattle evening. It acted as a perfect, clear mirror. In the reflection, I saw Evelyn pause near the front door. She pulled out her phone. She typed a rapid message. She had absolutely no idea I could see her. She hit send. A vicious, triumphant smirk spread across her face. The old man took the bait. she muttered under her breath. I stood alone in the dark kitchen. The structure of my family was completely fractured. They thought I was a broken, clueless old widower. They thought I would just roll over and surrender. Please find a comfortable seat. This story is going to take you somewhere very far and very dark. Hit that like button and drop a comment below letting me know where you're watching from. Trust me, you're going to love it here. I did not sleep that night. I needed the familiar, heavy machinery of my empire to clear my head. By 6 in the morning, I was pulling my truck into the executive lot of Vanguard Horizon. The Seattle fog was thick. The air was biting. I walked into the towering glass building and took the private elevator straight to the executive archives. If Evelyn and Preston were planning a hostile takeover, they had to alter the foundational operating agreements. I reached the heavy security door. I swiped my master key card. A harsh beep. A solid red light. Access denied. I swiped it again. Access completely denied. Having some trouble with the door? Harrison? The voice came from the shadows. I turned around slowly. Marcus Thorne stepped into the dim hallway light. Marcus was my chief financial officer. He was 47 years old. He wore a custom Italian suit and a smug, practiced smile. My MasterCard is malfunctioning, I said. My voice was calm. Oh, right, Marcus smirked, tucking his hands into his pockets. I should have warned you. Preston ordered a complete overhaul of the digital access protocols this weekend. The system is restricting access to sensitive areas. He mentioned you would be taking an extended leave of absence to mourn Clara. Don't worry, Harrison. We have everything under control. Go home and rest. I looked into Marcus's eyes. They were cold, calculating, and full of silent mockery. They were locking me out of my own company. They were building a digital fortress to hide their crimes. I did not argue. I nodded politely. A security update is long overdue. Tell Preston I appreciate his initiative. I walked calmly to my private office. I locked the heavy door. They thought shutting off my keycard would blind me. They fundamentally misunderstood how an old wolf protects his territory. 10 years ago, anticipating corporate espionage, I had a ghost backdoor coded directly into the mainframe. I reached under my desk. I pressed my thumb against a hidden biometric scanner. A secret compartment opened, revealing an offline mirrored hard drive. Before my finger could press the enter key to bypass the pathetic firewall, my private cell phone rang. It was the local hospital. Mr. Vance, a sterile, urgent voice said, "Your grandson, Connor, has been in a severe accident in a sports car. He is in the trauma unit. We need family here immediately." I slammed the laptop shut. The corporate war would have to wait. I drove through the heavy morning traffic like a madman. I burst through the emergency room doors. Evelyn was pacing the linoleum floor, furiously typing on her phone. She looked highly annoyed. Preston sat slumped in a plastic chair, sweating. "What happened?" I demanded, grabbing Preston's shoulder. He took a corner too fast in the rain. Preston trembled. He hit a concrete barrier. He lost a lot of blood. They need to do a transfusion. The trauma doors swung open. An exhausted attending physician walked out. His blue scrubs were stained with blood. "He is stable," the doctor said, holding a clipboard. "But his hemoglobin is critically low. We need to administer a massive blood transfusion immediately. However, your son has a very specific blood type. He is AB positive. We are entirely out of AB positive and universal donor blood due to a massive pileup on the interstate. We need direct family donors right now to cross-match and save his life." The world stopped spinning. The hum of the hospital ventilation completely faded away. Stern ab positive Stern. My mind, trained by decades of analyzing complex logistical data, instantly locked onto a monumental, undeniable biological impossibility. I am an O blood type. My late wife Clara was an O blood type. By the absolute, unbreakable laws of human genetics, two parents with type O blood can only ever produce children with type O blood. Therefore, my biological son, Preston, was undeniably an O blood type. Evelyn was an A blood type. Basic high school biology began screaming in my head. An O parent and an A parent can produce an A child. They can produce an O child. They cannot, under any conceivable circumstance, produce an AB positive child. The dominant B allele had to come from a biological father who carried the B trait. Preston did not carry it. I did not carry it. There was only one terrifying conclusion staring me in the face. The 20-year-old boy bleeding out on the operating table did not have a single drop of Vance's blood running through his veins. Connor was not my biological grandson. I slowly turned my head. Evelyn was aggressively waving her platinum credit card at the doctor, loudly demanding he charter a private helicopter to fly blood in from another hospital. She was putting on a massive theatrical performance. She was actively deflecting the urgent request for her to donate her own blood. She knew she couldn't donate without exposing the lie. I turned my cold gaze to my son. I expected to see a man confused by a laboratory mix-up. Instead, what I saw chilled me to the absolute bone. Preston was backed against the hospital wall. His knuckles were bone white. He was sweating profusely. He was completely terrified. He knew. He absolutely knew the genetic math did not add up. For one brief second, our eyes met across the sterile corridor. He saw the cold realization settle over my face. He instantly broke eye contact, unable to face the father he was destroying. I did not confront them in the open hallway. Confronting a cornered animal in public is a massive tactical error. I let the suffocating silence stretch. Evelyn's money secured the helicopter. Connor was stabilized. I suggested Preston and I get coffee in the basement cafeteria. He hesitated, looking at Evelyn for permission. She waved him off, busy on her phone. We sat in the depressing, flickering light of the cafeteria. Preston gripped his flimsy styrofoam cup like a lifeline. "So," I said, keeping my voice incredibly calm. "That was quite a scare. It is a good thing Evelyn covered the transport. But I have to admit, Preston, I'm a little confused by the medical details. The doctor said Connor is AB positive. Clara and I were O. You are O. Evelyn is A. How does a boy with those biological parents end up with AB positive blood?" Preston physically flinched. The nervous sweat returned in heavy beads. He did not express natural confusion. He reacted with immediate, explosive hostility. "You are grieving and paranoid, Dad," he snapped, slamming his cup down. His face flushed a deep crimson. "The lab made a typo on his chart. It happens all the time. Stop trying to turn a clerical mistake into a ridiculous conspiracy while my son is bleeding." I sat perfectly still. I knew exactly what genuine confusion looked like, and I knew exactly what a cornered, guilty coward looked like. He was an incredibly poor liar. I did not say anything. Quietly, methodically, I stood up. "You are probably right, Preston," I whispered. My words were heavy with an undeniable threat. It must simply be a typo. After all, what other possible explanation could there be? He swallowed hard. He stared at his coffee. I walked away. That evening, I played the role of the relieved, caring grandfather to absolute perfection. I bought fresh soup. I drove to their sprawling, multi-million-dollar lakeside estate. I had paid the down payment on that house. Preston and Evelyn were in the kitchen. She was drinking red wine, loudly complaining about the helicopter bill. I smiled. I offered a check on Connor upstairs. The house was completely silent. I walked into Connor's private bathroom. I pulled a pair of sterile latex gloves and 2 plastic evidence bags from my coat pocket. I opened the medicine cabinet. I carefully extracted his blue electric toothbrush, dropping it into the first bag. I slipped back out into the hallway. I bypassed the stairs and walked into the dark mudroom near the garage. Preston went to the executive gym every morning. He always dumped his sweaty gear in a wicker hamper. I found his gray athletic jacket. I held it up to the security light. I used metal tweezers to pluck 2 dark hairs, complete with the white root follicles from the collar. I dropped them into the second bag. I took off my gloves. I walked back into the kitchen, smiled at the traders, and gracefully excused myself. I did not drive home. I drove directly to a highly confidential 24-hour private genetics laboratory on the edge of Seattle. I handed the technician the bags and $5,000 in untraceable cash. I demanded an expedited result. The biological hammer was in motion. The next morning, at 6 a.m., my private burner phone vibrated violently on my desk. It was an automated security alert from the ghost backdoor I had coded into the Vanguard Horizon servers. Someone inside the executive suite was attempting a massive, unapproved wire transfer. I locked my home office door. I booted up my secure terminal. I bypassed their pathetic new firewalls and vanished into the digital shadows of my own company. I located the active terminal. It was Marcus Thorne, the CFO. Marcus was furiously typing, trying to force a heavily encrypted transfer of exactly $6 million out of the company. He was using a spoof credential package designed to mimic my exact digital signature. With a few precise keystrokes, I isolated his request. I quietly quarantined the transaction. I suspended the $6 million in a hidden digital purgatory. He could not complete the transfer, and he could not delete the footprint. I had him trapped. I traced the origin of the money. A wave of profound nausea hit me. The $6 million was not coming from operational revenue. It was being systematically drained directly from the Vanguard Horizon Employee Pension Fund. They were stealing the retirement savings of the truck drivers and dock workers who built this company. I downloaded every ledger, every forged signature, every offshore Cayman Island routing number. The scope of their treason was absolute, but I needed to know exactly who Marcus Thorne was to my daughter-in-law. I left my house and drove to the gritty industrial district. I walked into the sparse office of Dominic Reyes. Dominic was an ex-federal investigator turned ruthless private detective. I slid a blank check across his metal desk. I need you to dig up every shadow Evelyn Vance ever cast. I instructed, my voice hard as ice. Start with Marcus Thorne. 2 days later, Dominic handed me a thick, heavy manila dossier in a completely empty diner. They were not careful, Harrison, Dominic rumbled. Evelyn and Marcus were college sweethearts. They maintained a highly coordinated romantic and financial affair for the last 21 years. I secured a discrete DNA sample from Marcus yesterday. He is undeniably Connor's biological father. They had planted a cuckoo bird directly in my nest. They secured a permanent anchor to the Vance fortune. But the absolute killing blow was on the next page. Dominic slid a printed email toward me. It was date-stamped 12 years ago, sent from Preston to Evelyn. I read the words. My heart turned to stone. Asterisk, Evelyn, the specialist confirmed it today. The childhood illness left me completely sterile. I can never father a child. We have to maintain the illusion. If my mother finds out I cannot provide a biological heir, she will invoke the bloodline clause in the trust. She will cut me off entirely. My father must never know. Connor is the only thing keeping my inheritance secure. Asterisk. Preston knew. For 12 years, he knew. He was not a victim. He was a willing, cowardly accomplice. He sold his mother's honor and my trust for a comfortable paycheck. He watched me spoil a boy that wasn't mine, just to protect his own bank account. I folded the email. I looked at Dominic. What is your next move? Dominic asked. I'm going to invite them into my study, I said, buttoning my coat. I'm going to play the broken, defeated old man. I'm going to give them enough rope to hang themselves. I called Preston. I made my voice sound incredibly thin, exhausted, and trembling with grief. I told him I was drowning in sorrow. I told him to bring Evelyn over tonight so I could sign the succession agreement. I spent the next hour staging my study. I dimmed the lights. I ruffled my gray hair. I placed a framed photo of Clara right in the center of my desk. I slouched my posture. I transformed into a pathetic, crumbling widower. When they arrived, I shuffled slowly to the door. Preston hugged me with fake concern. Evelyn offered a tight, predatory smile. We sat in the dark study. I looked at Clara's photo. I forced a single, genuine tear, born from the real grief of losing my wife, to slide down my cheek. You were right, Evelyn, I whispered, my voice cracking perfectly. I cannot do this anymore. Without Clara, this house is a tomb. I'm so tired. Draw up the final papers. I will sign everything over to Connor. You and Preston can manage the operations. I just want this burden lifted. Evelyn sat up straighter. The greedy triumph practically radiated from her body. Her smirk was undeniable. Oh, Harrison, she cooed, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. We understand completely. We will have the documents ready for your signature at the Friday morning board meeting. We will execute the transfer officially in front of the entire executive committee. It will be a smooth transition. Preston patted my trembling hand. We will protect the legacy you and Mom built, Dad. The sheer audacity of his lie sent a shockwave of cold fury through my core. I swallowed the bile. I nodded slowly. As soon as their luxury SUV pulled out of my driveway, the fragile old man completely disappeared. My spine snapped straight. The tremor in my hands vanished. I picked up my phone. I dialed Elias Sterling, my personal corporate attorney. A ruthless legal shark. Elias, I commanded, my voice cold and hard. Cancel your week. We have a massive systemic breach of trust, $6 million in federal embezzlement, and a critical violation of the Clara Vance bloodline clause. Target, Preston, Evelyn, and Marcus Thorne. Coordinate with your contacts at the FBI. What are your instructions, Harrison? Elias asked. We let them sit at the head of the table on Friday, I whispered. We let them think they have one. And then we completely obliterate them. Over the next 48 hours, their arrogance became a blinding drug. Evelyn did not just prepare the documents. She invited the local Seattle business press and major shipping partners to the Friday board meeting. She wanted to make a grand, theatrical announcement of her new era. I discovered she had already ordered the legal team to draft paperwork removing Clara's name from all corporate charities, replacing it with her own. Meanwhile, Preston authorized a massive withdrawal from the company's expansion reserve to secretly fund the construction of a luxury ski resort in Aspen under his own name. While they measure my corner office for new Italian furniture, Elias and I sat in a highly secure room with Special Agent Miller of the FBI White-Collar Crime Division. We handed over the digital logs. The FBI tracked the $6 million through the fake shell companies directly to Marcus and Evelyn's offshore accounts. The forged digital signatures were verified. The warrants were signed. The trap was not just a corporate firing. It was a massive federal sting set to detonate on live camera. Friday morning arrived. The Seattle sky was a cold, brilliant, unforgiving gray. I did not wear a morning suit. I put on a perfectly tailored, charcoal gray bespoke suit. It was the armor of a corporate titan. I fastened heavy platinum cufflinks. I tied a deep crimson silk tie. I looked in the mirror. The trembling widower was dead. The founder of Vanguard Horizon stared back. I drove to the corporate headquarters. I walked through the glass doors, my posture perfectly rigid. The security guards who had pitted me yesterday stared in open shock. I strode to the executive elevator. Every step was a deliberate strike against their false reality. I pushed open the heavy mahogany doors of the primary boardroom. The room was packed. Flashing cameras from the local business press illuminated the space. Evelyn sat squarely at the very head of the long table, occupying my chair. Preston sat to her right, sweating slightly under the bright lights. Marcus Thorne sat to her left, wearing a smug, victorious grin. Connor sat next to him, scrolling mindlessly on his phone. The rest of the table was filled with new, sycophantic executives they had hired to rubber stamp the theft. I walked slowly to the only empty chair at the far end of the table. I sat down. The room fell completely silent. Evelyn leaned forward. She was absolutely radiating with unadulterated triumph. She slid a thick manila folder down the polished wood. It stopped directly in front of me. Sitting on top of the paperwork was a heavy gold pen. "This is the final succession agreement, Harrison," Evelyn stated. Her voice was sharp, commanding, and loud enough for the reporters to hear. "The board has approved the transition. We are ready to announce the new era of Vanguard Horizon. We just need your signature." Buried in those pages was the indemnification clause that would legally frame me for the stolen $6 million. Evelyn leaned back in my leather chair. A cruel, mocking smile spread across her face. "Now that Clara is gone," Evelyn said, her voice dripping with absolute venom, "it is time for you to step aside. You are done here, Harrison. It is our turn." The camera shutters clicked rapidly, capturing her brutal arrogance. Marcus chuckled softly. Preston looked down at his shoes, too cowardly to meet my eyes. I kept my face an impenetrable mask of stone. I reached out. I picked up the heavy gold pen. The metal felt cold. I looked directly at Preston. I gave him one final, silent plea to be a man, to stop this before the hammer fell. Preston swallowed hard. He looked away. He chose his path. I opened my fingers. The gold pen dropped onto the mahogany table. The sharp clatter echoed loudly through the silent boardroom. I folded my hands. I looked into Evelyn's arrogant eyes. "No," I said smoothly. Before she could even open her mouth to process my refusal, the heavy double doors of the boardroom violently swung open. Elias Sterling strode inside. He was flanked by 3 stern-faced FBI agents in dark windbreakers. The temperature in the room instantly plummeted. Elias did not pause for pleasantries. He marched directly to the head of the table. The triumphant smiles on the traitors' faces vanished, replaced by a suffocating wave of collective confusion. The reporters instantly raised their cameras, sensing blood in the water. Elias unclasped his sleek black briefcase. The metallic snap sliced through the silence. He pulled out a thick, tamper-proof envelope. With a smooth flick of his wrist, he tossed the genetic laboratory report onto the center of the table. It slid to a halt directly between Evelyn and Preston. "I am legally representing Harrison Vance," Elias announced. His booming baritone commanded absolute attention. "The sealed document before you is a legally binding genetic analysis. The biological samples analyzed yield a probability of paternity of exactly 0%. The subject, known as Connor, is definitively excluded as the biological offspring of Preston Vance." The words hit the room like a physical shockwave. A horrified gasp erupted from the press pool. Connor dropped his phone. The color drained entirely from his young face. He stared at his mother with wide, terrified eyes. Evelyn's beautifully constructed smirk violently shattered. It melted into a hideous mask of pure, undeniable panic. Her perfectly manicured hands trembled as they hovered over the white envelope. She was completely caught, exposed in front of the exact audience she had invited to witness her victory. Marcus Thorne felt the crushing weight of reality. The smug grin was wiped from his sweating face. He placed his hands on the table, frantically attempting to push his chair back and flee the room. He barely made it halfway to his feet before a towering FBI agent moved with terrifying speed. The agent slammed a heavy hand onto Marcus's shoulder, forcing him violently back into the leather seat. "Do not attempt to stand up," the agent commanded. His voice was a low, dangerous threat. Elias did not glance at Marcus. He kept his steely gaze locked on Evelyn. "Under the strict stipulations established by the Clara Vance Trust," Elias explained, his voice cutting through the rising panic. "The transfer of any corporate assets is strictly bound to the direct, verifiable biological heirs of the Vance bloodline. Because you have maliciously engaged in a massive biological fraud, this succession agreement is completely null and void. You possess no executive authority. You are entirely stripped of all corporate power." Preston shot up from his chair like a man electrocuted. His pale face twisted into a mask of theatrical outrage. He pointed a shaking finger at his wife. "How could you do this to me, Evelyn?" Preston yelled frantically, performing for the cameras. "You made me raise another man's son. You used me." He wanted the FBI and the press to believe he was innocent. He turned toward me, his hands raised in a pathetic plea, fake tears welling in his eyes. I reached down on my briefcase. I was not done with him. I pulled out the heavy dossier. I extracted the printed email from 12 years ago. I drew my arm back and threw the crisp paper directly at Preston's chest. It fluttered to the table, landing next to the DNA report. "Do not dare play the victim with me," I said. My voice dropped into a deadly, gravelly whisper that projected to every corner of the room. "You knew you were completely sterile. You have known for 12 long years. You sold your mother's sacred honor for a paycheck." Preston looked down at the highlighted text. His fake tears stopped instantly. He recognized his own private email address. The last drops of blood drained from his face, leaving his skin an ashen gray. Elias tapped the document. He read the devastating lines aloud for the entire room and the flashing cameras to hear. He exposed Preston's sterility and his active conspiracy to deceive Clara. The absolute, disgusting truth hung heavily in the air. Preston did not attempt to deny it. His knees gave out. He collapsed into his chair. He buried his face in his trembling hands and began to weep. The ugly, visceral sobbing of a man whose life was permanently destroyed. "Dad, please," Preston choked out. "She made me do it. She said Mom would cut me off." Evelyn glared at him with unadulterated disgust. "Do not pin your cowardice on me," she screamed, her voice cracking with furious panic. "You gladly took the money. You are a weak, miserable excuse for a man." She turned her venomous gaze to Marcus. "This was supposed to be flawless, Marcus. You promised me the digital tracks were covered. You promised he would never see the offshore routing numbers." Marcus snarled back, his smooth facade shattered. "You greedy sociopath. You demanded we accelerate the timeline. You pushed to drain the pension fund while his wife was dying." They were no longer sophisticated corporate predators. They were cornered rats, viciously tearing each other to pieces on live camera. The camera shutters sounded like machine gun fire, documenting every second of their spectacular self-destruction. I sat back in my chair and watched them burn. I felt absolutely zero empathy. My heart was a frozen vault. I gave a single nod to the FBI agents. The lead agent stepped forward. The handcuffs gleamed brightly under the fluorescent lights. "Marcus Thorne." "Evelyn Vance," the agent announced. His commanding voice silenced the screaming match. "You are under arrest for federal wire fraud and the criminal embezzlement of $6 million from the Vanguard Horizon Employee Pension Fund. You have the right to remain silent." The harsh, metallic clicking of heavy steel handcuffs ratcheting closed echoed through the boardroom. Evelyn began to thrash violently against the agent's grip. Her tailored designer suit twisted as she kicked her expensive heels against the carpet. The composure was gone. "You cannot do this to me," she screamed hysterically. "I gave you the illusion of a perfect legacy. You owe me, Harrison. You owe me everything." I watched her performance with unblinking detachment. The FBI agents ignored her venomous demands and dragged her toward the double doors. The press corps frantically snapped photos of her tear-streaked face and steel bracelets. Marcus offered no resistance. The overwhelming weight of the federal indictment crushed his arrogance. He hung his head low, walking out in humiliating silence. The mahogany doors swung shut. The room fell into a suffocating stillness. The newly appointed sycophant executives quietly gathered their briefcases and scrambled out the side doors. I slowly turned my gaze to Preston. He remained slumped in his chair, sobbing quietly. I reached into my briefcase one final time. I pulled out a single sheet of legal paper embossed with the official seal of Elias's law firm. I walked down the length of the polished table. The rhythmic clicking of my shoes echoed loudly. I stopped directly beside Preston. I dropped the paper onto his lap. Preston lowered his hands. He read the bold header through tear-filled eyes. It was a legally binding eviction notice. "You have exactly 24 hours to clear your belongings out of the estate I bought for you," I stated. My voice was devoid of any paternal warmth. "You will leave the keys on the counter. Your employment at Vanguard Horizon is permanently terminated. You are stripped of your title and salary." "Dad, please," Preston whimpered, his eyes wide with desperate terror. "Where am I supposed to go? I have nothing left." "You made your choice 12 years ago," I replied. My tone was as unforgiving as solid granite. "Elias has executed the legal amendments to the trust. You are completely and permanently disinherited. You will not receive a single penny from my estate. You are fired. You are evicted. Do not ever attempt to contact me again." Preston buried his face in his hands, weeping openly. I stepped away from him. I turned my attention to 20-year-old Connor. He was frozen in shock. His vast inheritance had just been brutally ripped away. He looked at me with a heartbreaking mixture of fear and confusion. I walked over and stood a few feet away from him. "Listen to me carefully, Connor," I said, keeping my voice firm but slightly softer. "You are not responsible for the crimes your mother and biological father committed. However, you are no longer a part of the Vance family. You'll have to learn how to navigate the real world without a safety net. The boy nodded slowly, swallowing hard. I will fully cover your university tuition and basic living expenses for exactly 1 year, I continued. That will give you 12 months to find a job, secure student loans, and figure out your own path. Use that time wisely, because after those 12 months expire, you are completely on your own. Let that sink in. I understand, sir, Connor whispered quietly. Thank you. Connor stood up, gathered his belongings, and walked silently out of the boardroom. Preston followed shortly after, staggering blindly toward the exit, a broken man walking into a harsh world he was entirely unprepared to face. The mahogany doors swung completely shut. I stood alone in the expansive boardroom. The overwhelming chaos had completely evaporated, leaving behind a sharp, ringing stillness. Elias Sterling stepped quietly out of the shadows. It is done, Harrison, Elias said quietly. The malignant cancer has been surgically cut out of your company. I took a deep breath, feeling the suffocating weight of the past 2 decades finally lift from my shoulders. Yes, Elias, but the empire still needs to be rebuilt. 6 months passed. The relentless wheels of federal justice moved with devastating certainty. Monica and Marcus were sentenced to 15 years in a maximum security penitentiary for massive wire fraud. Their luxurious, pampered lives violently evaporated into the stark reality of prison uniforms. Preston faced a crushing reality. Completely cut off from the vast Vance wealth, he was forced to move into a cramped, noisy apartment complex on the less desirable side of Seattle. I had Dominic check on him exactly once. Preston was working a grueling minimum wage retail job at a local home improvement store, stocking heavy shelves. He had finally learned the true value of a hard-earned dollar. I felt absolutely no pity. I focused my formidable energy on repairing the profound damage. I personally rehired every single loyal executive that Evelyn had fired. I returned the $6 million directly to the employee pension accounts, ensuring the hardworking men and women of Vanguard Horizon did not lose a fraction of their security. But the ultimate restoration required a structural change. On a beautifully clear Tuesday morning, I rode the private elevator up to the roof of the Vanguard Horizon headquarters. The expansive rooftop offered a breathtaking view of the Seattle skyline and the bustling docks. The cold wind whipped sharply at my tailored suit jacket, but I felt a deep, radiating warmth in my chest. Elias stood beside me, holding a thick, leather-bound portfolio. I took the heavy gold pen he offered. I placed the documents on a glass table. I began to sign my name with smooth, decisive strokes. I was officially executing a brand new, unbreakable trust agreement. 50% of my entire personal wealth and corporate holdings were instantly transferred into the newly established Clara Vance Scholarship Fund. It was a massive initiative to provide full university scholarships to brilliant, underprivileged youth. Clara's name would be forever associated with profound generosity, entirely erasing Evelyn's sickening greed. The remaining 50% of the company was irrevocably placed into an employee stock ownership program. The immense wealth of Vanguard Horizon would not be handed down to an entitled, ungrateful heir. It would be systematically distributed among the dedicated truck drivers, warehouse managers, and loyal executives who had actually bled to build this place alongside me. I stood near the edge of the tall rooftop, looking out over the endless city. Family is not defined by a simple marriage certificate. It is defined by absolute, unwavering loyalty. A lone wolf might lose his mate, but he never, ever loses his teeth. And I just bit back,